So welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Heatio Home Energy Show. And today I'm joined by Dan Caesar, the CEO of Fully Charged Live. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really good. I was saying it feels like an age since I last spoke to you. I remember the days of the Renewables Roadshow when me and Tom were trekking around the country doing, I think it was like 6 shows over about a 10-day period. Was that right?
That is probably about 15, 16 years ago that we did that. And I remember at the time, a lot of people thought we were slightly insane because we took that kind of roadshow. And it wasn't a small exhibition, and we took it to 6 cities over 2 weeks, basically. And it was a great event, but here I am now running multiple events all over the world. So by comparison, that was.
So was that you cutting your teeth on the Renewables Roadshow? Because I just remember that it was part of the branding was that truck, like a articulated truck with the Renewables Roadshow on the side, and I just had that vision of that kind of moving its way throughout the country, and us and every other exhibitor kind of following behind it. I remember we did one. It was down in Exeter, I think, and that was the kind of last one on the circuit. And then trying to get back from Exeter to North Wales was an absolute joy.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, it was an amazing thing to work on. I mean, if you remember, that's the truck actually. So I've got it.
There it is. Yes, the memorabilia.
The memorabilia. But no, I mean, I'd worked for Corgi from about 2003, I think it was, and I very immediately gravitated towards heat pumps, solar thermal, solar PV. And when I left there in 2008, I was really, really keen to get these technologies out into the wild, particularly installers and specifiers. And that was an amazing time, actually. There was quite a lot of positivity around those technologies at that point. And there is again now, but obviously, you know, it's several years later, and those technologies are finally going to have their day in the sun. Pun intended, but yeah, it was a great thing to work on. But obviously, we ran out a little bit of steam because if you remember, David Cameron talks about some of the technologies that you love and I love as green crap.
Yes,
and there was a clear change in politics that kind of sort of made it harder, really, in the UK at least, to promote those technologies for a little while. But here we are now. We're still smiling and a lot wiser, and you know, I'm still promoting those technologies as I have been for 20 years, and I know you're very much in the same frame of mind as I am.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a long old journey. When you think back then, that was probably maybe 2012, 2013, something around there. And as you say, still fighting the good fight now, and many years before. But what was it that actually got you into it? You mentioned briefly there your time in Corgi. What was it that actually was that you starting life off just in the gas world, or were you already starting to look at renewables at that time?
No, that was the beginning of it. I'd actually sort of cut my teeth in content, as we call it now. We didn't call it that then. We called it publishing. We called it events. And I'd been in the market, and I was looking for a new role that was a bit more interesting, and I got approached to be sort of director of communications at Corgi, which is the gas safety watchdog back in the day. Or I could tell you some great stories about that. Maybe now's not the time. And I went to work there, and I found it really important because obviously I was talking to people about carbon monoxide poisoning on a regular basis. Like, I met victims of families who'd suffered from an awful fate. And for me, that was a real kind of penny drop moment that I wanted to do something important with my career. Carbon monoxide was the beginning of that, but then I began to look into the new technologies, which didn't involve carbon at all. And I became quite fascinated and felt strongly that heat pumps, solar, and other technologies were the future. And I really started to promote those very, very heavily from about 2005 onwards. So for me, I've loved every minute of it. It's been a roller coaster at times. You know, we're very much kind of dependent on government support for the technologies that we promote. But I have really enjoyed it. It's given me great purpose. And every time someone comes to me now and says, you know, I bought a heat pump because of what you've done with the Fully Charged show, or I've bought an electric car or electric bike, or, you know, solar panels because of what I've seen you do with the Fully Charged show, that for me is a big tick in the box.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, as you say, the fully charged show it's grown incredibly over the last few years, but it seems to also have been a bit of a transition to it. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong in saying, but it seems to have transitioned in the same way the industry has. So maybe starting off with there was seemed to be a lot of solar and EV, and I'm sure that's still the case now. But more recently, there seems to be these other kind of electrified technologies starting to come in as part of the mix.
Yeah, I mean, it was founded by Robert Llewellyn, who used to be a presenter on Scrap Heap Challenge and is also Crichton in Red Dwarf, and he started it back in 2010. YouTube channel, which was primarily about the energy transition, but really about electric cars, I guess, and solar and batteries. I guess those were the three sort of dominant technologies. I joined in 2016, and because my background had been home energy, I really came with a view to say to Robert, look, I think this is about more than just the electric car. He knew that too, but he was less au fait, I think, with the home energy industry. And in the last few years, we've really, really ramped that element up. So now we have two YouTube channels. The Fully Charged Show is where we cover things that move, vehicles basically, and Everything Electric Show, which is our younger channel, which is where we cover home energy and clean energy. And our exhibitions now have been changed from Fully Charged Live, as they were in the first 12 exhibitions, to now they're called Everything Electric. So we've just done Everything Electric Australia. We're just about to do Everything Electric London, and we have Everything Electric North in Harrogate coming up in May as well. Wow. But the beauty of it really is it's this journey where some people get solar panels first and then they decide to get an electric car, or some people get an electric car and then they decide to get the charger, change their energy tariff. Maybe they get solar, maybe they consider a home battery. Heat pumps are obviously a big part of that. Electrification of heat more generally is a big part of that. And also vehicle to grid, vehicle to load. Those are big technologies on the horizon as well. And we cover everything from electric bikes to electric planes, all manner of different home technologies. And so we're really, really comfortable now as Everything Electric that we're actually being able to bring all these technologies together. You'll be familiar with the phrase electrify everything. Having been in this industry for long enough and having thought it through, I think we can electrify almost everything. So that's why we're called Everything Electric now. We can gather all those things under one roof, and it's been an incredible journey, and I think really important, because I think we've got to take these technologies out to consumers, or people, as they're also known. Yes. That's such a critical part of the process.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we had I'm not sure if you've come across him, a gentleman called Mick Wall from he's a IT guru in a university that looks after data servers, but certainly in this industry he's become a bit more well known for his website Energy Stats UK, where he kind of publishes daily agile energy tariffs. But he was on the show really talking about that kind of consumer journey, the people's journey through the adoption of these technologies, and ultimately to that position of being a fully electrified home. He was on the show a couple of weeks back. There's a couple of episodes that we released, and it's really interesting to see somebody that's actually taken those steps and those initial. He referred to them as the gateway drugs. Getting solar on the roof and then starting to see in the little app, how much energy you're generating, but importantly, how much you're exporting, and then what that triggers in your brain in terms of, well, I'm sending this energy back to the grid. I'm not necessarily consuming it, and then I'm buying electricity at a later time in the day at a higher rate. So what more can you do? And then he went battery, and then he went to I think solar. So he went solar first, then battery, then he did some upgrades to the home, electric vehicle, and then we went heat pump. But he's literally stepped through all those journeys, and I guess the opportunity that people have with the Fully Charged live show and Everything Electric show now is to actually come and see what the possibility looks like with all the technologies that are available, the manufacturers that are available. Can people physically touch and feel this stuff at the show?
They can, and I think that's become the unique strength of what we're doing. I have to be completely honest, Simon. I had run an awful lot of events over my long working history. But when I met Robert and we started talking about Fully Charged, it wasn't in my mind to do an event initially because the YouTube channel was growing so quickly. But actually, the reality was that even though we have 1 million subscribers now, about then we had about 1/10 of that, and it really didn't make any money. And so the event always came out of happenstance. I almost said, well, begrudgingly, well, I suppose we could do an event, Robert, because I'm fairly good at organizing events. And then that's given birth to this incredible kind of number of events that we run around the world. But as we've gone on and we've worked out what our strength is, really, it's that they do a lot of desktop research on our channels. Maybe they're looking at a heat pump, looking at electric car, etc. But then they come to the show to touch the products, to talk to experts, and in the example of the cars, to do the test drives. And I know obviously energy is more your focus, but I think it's fascinating that we run a huge test drive program now for all of our shows. And I think it is analogous to heat pumps and other technologies as well. People want to talk to kind of independent people in a non-confrontational atmosphere, soak up that information, and maybe get in the car and actually take it for a tour before buying it. You can imagine, really, in the old days with test drives, you might have done one, but you've probably driven a combustion engine car before. So what's the big deal? Now moving into a different type of powertrain, and often a different type of brand, because you'll be aware there's lots of new car brands now that are kind of starting to threaten the legacy automakers. Those test drives have taken on a much, much bigger sense of importance. And the same applies to home tech, really. People are really interested to see a mock-up of a heat pump and, what's it going to look like outside of my property, to have a chat about someone. Does it make a lot of noise? Is that an urban myth, et cetera, et cetera? How much am I going to be paying for this? And it's really interesting because the way we looked at it with the boiler is it just sits there and you don't give it any second thought until it goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
Then it's suddenly the very most important thing in the house. Equally, the electricity you get from the grid, you never really give that a second thought until you have a blackout. This whole energy transition makes energy much, much more visible. And I think the gateway drug is a good point. But what we quite often use the phrase, we see the electric car as the kind of spear tip to get people excited and then bring them into this electrification world. The reality is that people get incredibly excited about cars.
Yeah.
I think
it's a lot
crazy,
easier to get excited about.
It is. They're very, some of them are very cool, very sexy products, but they are fundamentally just a product. But people name their cars, right?
Yeah.
They don't name their boilers quite so often. People get really excited. So we use that excitement and the dynamism that kind of electric vehicles of all shapes and sizes give us to bring people into these exhibition halls and to show them everything. But yeah, it's so common for people to, once they get one of these technologies, to then say, well, I'd like 3 or 4 or 5. It's very, very common that people go on this journey, and we're delighted to help with that. So the live events have been absolutely amazing, actually, to see that in action.
I bet, and I would imagine, I mean, maybe this is just a personal thing from my perspective, but if you were interested in an electric vehicle and you were at that point of pure discovery, how does it feel to drive, with no sound of the engine or anything like that beneath you? If you were to do that by going to the traditional route of going to a car showroom or something like that, there's an expectation of purchase. You're going to meet a salesperson who is going to sit you down afterwards and start talking about, what's your next step in the journey. Whereas imagine coming to an exhibition like that, not only are you going there and you've got the opportunity to do that, but you've also got the opportunity to meet battery storage manufacturers, EV chargers, manufacturers, anybody that's in that journey of electrifying your home, and the ability to test drive an EV as part of that experience, part of that day, must be a driver for some people to be able to go and do that in a let's say safe, non-confrontational environment.
I mean, I think if you can remember going into car dealerships, it can be quite an intimidating process. In my memory of it, at least, you'd go in there, and I like cars, but I'm not a car guy per se, and I know a lot less than people who are selling them. So going in there feels like a very kind of masculine experience. It's very, it can be quite technical. you certainly, you cross that threshold, as you say, with there becomes something of an expectation that you're a very hot lead, and you get treated as such. And so the reality is our shows are, that opportunity to just come in. You could just come in, you could try different cars from different brands, for example. That might take you a few Saturdays in a row to, test drive a few cars, where you can come to our show and you can do 3 or 4. You're not getting the hard sell. You've also got the best possible people on stand. So we had Hyundai in Sydney a couple of weekends ago, and they had all their EV gurus on the stand. Whereas if you went into a Hyundai dealership, you wouldn't get, with no disrespect to Hyundai, you wouldn't get the same level of expertise. And also, it's a much friendlier environment. There's loads of live talk, so you can park your bum for a while and just sit and listen to the information. Everyone's pretty independent and objective. It's a much more female and family-friendly audience as well, so you can really have a look around and take your time. So I think we've not accidentally stumbled on a great formula, but certainly it wasn't originally in the grand plan. But now we can see that actually it really is moving the needle. People are coming to these shows are either they already have one of the technologies and they're looking to buy another one. So about half of our audience have an EV already, but the other half are considerers. They're actively considering buying the heat pump or buying solar or buying their first electric car. And what's interesting is for you to come to an event, for you to pay for the ticket and travel, you're probably amongst our most serious audience members, right? You're seriously interested. You're not purely coming for entertainment. There's quite a lot of that as well. We're YouTubers. We've got great presenters, so we try and make it fun and educational and all that sort of stuff. But they're the people going, well, I'll spend that ticket money because I do think I want to get a heat pump in the next 6 months, or I do want to get an electric vehicle in the next 3 months. So that has kind of blown our exhibitors away because they're not having, there's no time wasters there.
Yeah.
Almost everyone comes to their stand is seriously interested. And for car companies in particular, they're just, they can't believe that, because they would go to a mass market show at the moment. And let's take, there's a great show down in the south of England called Goodwood Festival of Speed. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a real kind of mecca for petrol heads. But of the hundreds of thousands of people that go to that, the percentage of people who are interested in buying electric in the next 6 months, 12 months is tiny. You get all these people coming onto their stand, kind of maybe vaguely interested, but at our shows, every single person who comes on is a potential customer. Yeah. And the reality is that we didn't set out to be this sort of commercial matchmaker between companies and consumers that are ready to buy. But our mission is to accelerate the transition, right? As is yours, I'm sure, as is a lot of people who've shared this space for the last 20 years. So if we can inspire purchases and we can get people over the line and we can match make the buyer and the seller more quickly, then, I consider that a really important role that we're playing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned you've got a couple of UK dates coming up as well. We're going to take on London on the end of March. So we're really looking forward to that. We're going to be at the Excel Centre in London. That's part of our kind of mainstreaming strategy. We know a lot of audience will come to that. But in addition to that, we're looking to get more and more mainstream attendees, those people who are just starting to consider, how they heat their home, how they power their home, what they use to get around in. And then we go up to the Yorkshire Event Centre in Harrogate in May. We launched that show last year. It was a tremendous success, lovely venue. And then we do actually repeat our South show, which is at Farnborough International in Hampshire in October. So we have 3 UK shows this year. And then we have multiple shows overseas. We're up to 6 now. We've got a show in Europe, show in Australia, show in Canada. And we're just trying to work out how we can maybe take that to 10 or 12 shows in the next few years. But, that's, we can only spread ourselves so thin. So that requires, quite a lot of investment and strategic thought. But no, we're really excited because we do feel that these shows, do actually make a bit of a difference. And personally, I really love home energy still. I really think it's absolutely critical. It's just a few years behind where electric vehicles are in terms of uptake. I mean, I think it's criminal, the number of heat pumps that are sold in the UK versus Europe. It should be much, much higher. But we're getting there. There are now some incentives in place, and I expect heat pump growth to grow considerably in the next few years. So for me personally, tricking people in with the cars and then getting them to buy a heat pump or solar panels is fantastic. Yeah, to get them on that journey, and as you say, the car is it's a certainly more sexy attraction than a heat pump. And I think one of the questions I wanted to ask you today, especially with your experience in this industry and what you're seeing across maybe feedback from the YouTube channels or your experiences in the different countries, this challenge around the cost of the technology, because I would imagine through your exhibitions, I'm sure you will have contractors coming through the door as well who are seeing these technologies for the first time and getting a bit of a sense of how they work. And we recognize the fact that contractors play a big part in the more the transition into this industry, the more the cost will come down. The more manufacturers and the more competition we have in the industry, again, the cost will come down. But so just a few weeks back, we launched our energy as a service proposition, which is where essentially we remove that upfront capital cost barrier for the consumer. We supply and install the heat pump, solar, battery, and we can also include an electric vehicle charger within that package. And essentially, they get the savings straight away on their energy bill, and then they pay a kind of monthly rental fee to access all this technology in their homes. And we're just stepping into a government-funded trial with that proposition alongside E.ON, who will be bringing out a unique energy as a service tariff that will be used to kind of support the proposition and make it really financially viable for the consumer. But how are you seeing the costs that we're facing in the UK in comparison to maybe other countries, or even just how you've seen those costs change over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you might get a slightly long answer, but I think it's absolutely critically important. So we've just come back from Sydney. They have some things that we don't have here. They have so much sunshine, they have to curtail their solar, which is just crazy to me. They have a lot of rooftop solar, a lot of batteries. They also have a government administration that's very pro electric vehicles and pro clean technologies as well, which is a really, really important part of the mix. And while they do have some inflationary cost of living pressures in Australia, it's nothing like to the same extent as we're seeing here in the UK. For us, equity is really, really important. The ability for everyone to get on this journey is really, really important, because it's probably the easiest stick you can beat this industry with. The tech's expensive, and it's not that straightforward, of course. But the UK is in a very strange position economically at the moment. It's being hit and buffeted by lots of different economic headwinds, and therefore, costs of these technologies, could be considered a little bit prohibitive at the moment. As I said, it's more complicated than that, but that's the way it could be painted. I'll come on to the home energy piece, but if you take electric cars first, for example, the UK has managed to make itself the only EV market in the developed world that has plateaued its electric vehicle sales. It has removed the plug-in car grant. It has, I think, removed the charger grant. It has diluted the zero-emission vehicle mandate. There is lots of misinformation here in the UK press that isn't present elsewhere, apart from maybe in the US. And that has combined to plateau the electric vehicle month-on-month sales at about 15%. We probably should be on more like 25% now. We should be closer to where they are in the Netherlands. We were tracking close to them. But what's interesting, Simon, in relation to cost is that the cars that are selling at the moment are often through salary sacrifice via companies, because companies are able to take the long view and also spreadsheet the death out of the economics, right? What is best for our business, and they can see that electric vehicles are best for their business, whether it's vans or it's, company cars. Fleet electric sales in the UK are propping up the UK market at the moment. So the economics for electric cars are very, very good. And as I often say to people, actually, you'd be surprised. I've had an electric car since 2015, and it has saved me an absolute fortune. So the economics are not as bad as maybe some of the Daily Mail might have you believe, for example. But when it comes to the other technologies, it's good that finally there is, quite a generous bit of policy support for heat pumps in particular. That should grease the wheels. I know the likes of Octopus and British Gas, OVO, etc., are kind of jumping on that at the moment. But the reality is that I've always felt very, very strongly, and you haven't got me on the podcast to say this because we haven't spoken for ages, but I've always felt very strongly that energy service is the key unlocking mechanism, really. You know, for me, it makes total sense that you could actually lower one of those barriers, which is the upfront cost, as much as possible, and you could present it to someone on much more of a, you know, a monthly basis, and you could share in some of the value proposition of bringing in these new technologies. So I'm not just saying that, Simon. I'm delighted to hear what you're doing, and maybe we should get you on our podcast by return, because I think it's absolutely pivotal. We need to get more people on this journey. When the zero emission vehicle mandate was being kind of it was being mooted that the timelines might change, a lot of people were presenting it as a cliff edge. You've all got to get an electric car tomorrow. And of course, that was never the case. You could still run around in a hybrid until, well, as long as you could keep one, basically, for decades, if you liked, or even up to 2035 or December 31st, 2024, you could still buy a hybrid car. So there was no cliff edge. There is no cliff edge. People will go when they're ready. But more of those tools, we can get people to go earlier, the better. So I think energy as a service, I've talked about it for a long time as kind of the holy grail, really, of how do we mass market some of these technologies. So I'm delighted to hear you're doing it. Yeah, but often you find the economics of some of these technologies are really, really good once you dig into them. Once you really dig into them, you can see actually they do speak for themselves. But anything that can make it easier is very welcome.
Yeah, there's so many barriers around it, but that ability to essentially bring lenders to the table and display a return on investment, the ability to bring the consumer to the table and ensure that whatever they do pay, they do see an economic benefit. You know, they do see that they are making savings on their energy bills, or whilst providing energy security, so they can make that decision now. And then obviously you need the manufacturers at the table to make sure that, you know, we're able to deliver this at a capital cost that that doesn't make the whole economic model fall apart. So there's lots of pieces to the puzzle to make it work. But we actually did a lengthy discovery program under the Green Homes Finance Accelerator, which is a government-funded project under the Net Zero Innovation Portfolio, and it was from that the actual business case for this really stood up. But this is something we've been working towards at Heatio back since 2018, where we were funding heat pump installations into people's homes under the renewable heat incentive. So it's been a long journey to try and get all these parties to the table, and certainly parties with the significant enough or deep enough pockets to help fund this on a really, really large scale. But you'll certainly hear more about it on this show. I'd be more than happy to come on, and it'd be delightful to come on and talk about it on yours as well, because we do think it's going to be a game changer for the industry, certainly in that electrification of people's homes. Take a lot of the decision out of the equation for the customer and just provide them with a relatively simple solution. But a key part of making that all work, we've actually seen in the press over the last few days an announcement from Octopus where they're bringing this the first kind of vehicle to grid tariff to their customers, and that's a big part, because you can imagine when people start looking at the economic model for something like energy as a service, a big part of that is what can you drive from supporting the grid and delivering flexibility to ensure that if you start electrifying everybody's homes, that you don't just overload the grid. So have you seen much of this vehicle to grid tariff? Did you kind of see that coming down the track?
I mean, I would say, you know, the progress with electric cars has been very, very fast, actually. The progress with home energy technologies has been a little bit slower in the UK, at least. So if you only have to look across the water to see, you know, heat pump penetration very, very high in Europe, for example. I would genuinely say that the three big things that make me super excited about the near future is that affordable electric vehicles are on the way. You'll be familiar with a lot of the initial ones have been a little bit punchy, been a bit premium. There's a lot more affordable cars on the way. Now, we've got to where we've got to on the basis of more expensive electric cars. 92.1% of new cars sold in Norway in January were pure electric. Really? And that's a fairly wealthy nation. Been ahead of the curve. You know, there are lots of other countries that are catching up. But this is all without the advent of affordable electric vehicles. They are now coming, spurred on by the likes of the Asian manufacturers who spy on opportunity, and then that will force other manufacturers to play. So the affordability is a key point. The other thing I think is energy as a service, I think is an absolutely key accelerant, key catalyst for this growth. And the other thing is the vehicle V2X, V2L, V2G, bidirectional. Let's use that phrase as a kind of a umbrella term. Bidirectional is going to be absolutely huge for this whole industry. The reality is that in 95% of the time, our car sits on the drive unused. You know, what kind of asset is that, Simon? You know, if you're running a fleet, you want those cars or vehicles constantly rotating, constantly out on the road, making the most of the economies. As a consumer, we buy a car at great expense. It looks pretty and it sits on our driveway if we're lucky enough to have one, unused the bulk of the time. It will, in the new world, be able to act as a battery, you know, to be bidirectional with your property. Potential, obviously, to interact with the grid is there, of course, but also the ability to charge up on cheap electricity overnight and use that, you know, cheaper electricity when the price of electricity rises during the day is very, very significant indeed. And also, one little thing, it also helps with energy resilience. You know, in America in particular, they found it, you know, quite inspiring to go, actually, well, if there's a power cut, if I've got a Ford F-150 Lightning on my driveway with bidirectional charging, actually my lights can stay on. I'm the one house in the street with the lights on. So that's a very powerful motivator, particularly in the US and Australia and places like that. But in Australia, because of the amount of solar they have, they're literally trying to work out how they can almost create free energy for consumers through economics, and how they can actually, you know, get into the, you know, make consumers prosumers who can help balance the grid, you know, and they've got power that they can pull from at any given point. The idea of a virtual power plant is really, really catching, I was going to say catching fire, maybe that's, I don't know, but it's certainly getting a lot of attention. So we see the affordable EVs, energy as a service, and bidirectional as the reasons why this already very, very compelling proposition becomes absolutely, you know, unmissable, you know, in very, very short order indeed. So yeah, V2G, depending on where you go around the world, it's expected to be next 2 or 3 years. They'll get some of the barriers down, because there's some technical, you know, things that need to go through, standards, etc., etc. But it's going to be massive, we think. Yeah,
it's good. I think it's such an exciting opportunity. I mean, we've done some of the within our discovery phase of the finance accelerator, and even before that, we did some work under Heat Pump Ready, where for each installation that goes in under energy as a service, or even if it's a standalone kind of able to pay installation, we fit a little box in the home, the kind of Heatio home hub. And that has the ability to kind of connect all these technologies that we're putting in. So the one we've done quite recently, it's got a SunAmp thermal battery, a Samsung air source heat pump, and then the Give Energy all-in-one battery and an EV charger. And essentially this box of ours sits in the center of the home. It monitors all these devices, but we also monitor the smart meter data, and then we all connect into a flexible tariff, like an Octopus Energy tariff, or the new tariffs that E.ON are bringing out. And essentially that box from our cloud infrastructure decides how best to run that home, based on what the customer's needs are, but also based on what the demand of the grid is. But essentially, each one of those boxes connects to our virtual power plant. So each of those homes are connected within the region. And ultimately, to make that economic model work, and how do we ensure that we deliver the best price to the consumer, in terms of the rental cost and how do we keep that down as low as possible, is we have to supplement that with these kind of ancillary revenue streams, which to us is the opportunity to balance those homes either individually or collectively via the virtual power plant, to ensure that there is that income from flexibility services to Heatio, which in turn, rather than necessarily paying the customer for that benefit, we keep their monthly rental cost down as low as possible by bringing those two sides together. So it's, as you say, there does seem to be more and more people across the world looking at this. We've been working closely with a company called Solar Zero, who are out in New Zealand. They've got a very similar model. I think they've got around 10,000 homes connected to their virtual power plant. They're fully owned by BlackRock as their finance arm. So it's really interesting that we can actually do this in the UK. We might not be doing it at a big enough scale yet, but the opportunity is there to do this. And I think the vehicle to grid opportunity just gives us a huge battery to be able to call on as and when the grid needs that flexibility, but also the ability to dump into that EV charger when the opportunity is there.
It's extraordinary, the opportunity that exists, to be completely honest. And I think it's why some people are quite so scared of this whole transition. You know, we certainly felt there was a lot of misinformation that was coming out already, but the last year or so it's been much, much worse. As I think the penny drops that, you know, this whole market is changing. You know, you're familiar with the term disruption. There's a great book I read many years ago, the Disruption of Clean Energy and Transport by Tony Sieber. And it is going to wipe away incumbents. It's going to change things completely, I think. And we're in the foothills of these changes. But I have to say, I'm beyond confident that it will happen. It's just how quickly it happens in each of the countries. I think the UK has found itself in a bit of a laggard position on some of these areas, which is ironic, I think, because as ever, the UK actually has some of the most innovative minds and the most innovative technology going. So with what you're doing, let's be honest, Octopus have made a big impact over recent years. We work with My Energy, you might be familiar with, have made a big impact. You mentioned Sunamp there, you know, there are tons and tons of British startups that have made a big impact and survived through, you know, frankly, a difficult decade, economically speaking. But the UK always struggles, I think, to go to that next level, you know, and how do we turn these companies, these startups, into the scale-ups and the big businesses of tomorrow? Yeah. And I'm hopeful that, you know, I think a different political environment would probably bring back investment into the UK. I think it's quite hard to invest in the UK at the moment when you know there is going to be an election at some point in the not too distant future. So that's definitely holding us back a little bit. But I think once we get through that phase, we'll be in a different mindset. I couldn't believe it. I was walking around the show in Sydney. It was full of positive, sun-kissed people, you know, who were very, very, you know, excited about the clean energy future. And they were saying to me, you know, 3 years ago, we were depressed. We were in the doldrums. You know, we really weren't getting any electric cars. The current administration in Australia was very regressive, was holding up lumps of coal in Parliament rather than, you know, looking up to that big yellow orb in the sky and saying, what could we do with that? And they have had a political change there in the last couple of years, and it has completely flipped the outlook. And so I think in the UK, I think that's the one bit that's missing. The brains are here, you know, people, there's some dynamic entrepreneurs in the UK as well. You know, we've got some great tech. It's still a great country, isn't it? And we do get solar. We can actually power things off solar here. We also have huge wind resource. We still have something of a manufacturing base, but to really unlock it, I think we're getting to a point where we probably do need, you know, much more in the way of policy support and consistency as well. That's
it, and cross party, I think, making sure that we haven't got them sat there fighting off against each other. But I'm keen to, I mean, through industry, we've known each other for quite a long time, and considering the last time we we spoke was probably almost a decade ago. My final question to you before we wrap up is: let's assume we get together again in another decade. Hopefully, it'll be sooner than that. But and I'm not gonna hold you to this and call you back onto the show in 10 years' time and say, right, okay, you were way off. But what does the UK kind of clean tech climate market look like in the next? If you were to hope what it's going to look like in, say, 5 years' time, how do you see the market evolving?
I think it will be extremely dynamic in another decade's time. I think if you look at the developments over the last 10 years, it's 2024 now. In 2014, the available electric cars at that point was the Model S Tesla and the Nissan Leaf, and I think maybe the Renault Zoe had just emerged, BMW i3. So really those 4 or 5, maybe 6 models of electric cars available at that point in time. Now there are hundreds. You can see an electrification of heat space is really revving up nicely. And obviously, solar and batteries have done fairly well in the UK in a market where we're not blessed with tons and tons of sunshine. So I see that progress of the last 10 years as being insanely quick, driven by, things like batteries getting much cheaper, much more energy dense. There's still a lot of gains to be made there. I cannot actively, because I'm not clever enough, I cannot actively incorporate artificial intelligence into what's going to happen in the next 10 years, but I think its impact is going to be very, very significant indeed. But what I can say is, from an electric car point of view, I think that we are likely to be selling only pure electric vehicles in this, or people are likely to only be buying pure electric vehicles in this country by the end of the decade, irrespective of policy. I think there will come a tipping point where by 2030, almost everyone will just go, well, I've seen enough of these now. My friends have all got one. The grid hasn't blown up, and I think most people will have one. So in a decade's time, I'd be confident that even the Luddites might have begrudgingly be buying battery electric vehicles as well. I'd like to think that will go from 1 million solar rooftops in the UK to at least doubling that in that time frame. I think battery energy storage will do well, but I think also the bidirectional bit we've talked about will mean that maybe, just maybe, your battery won't be hung on a wall. Maybe it will just be sat on your driveway as part of a vehicle. And I think the big revolution, the big thing that will be very, very different is electrification of heat. I think that will be in a very, very different place in 10 years' time. And I certainly think ETO with an energy as a service offer is well poised to benefit. I mean, I think in the UK it's been really interesting to watch the heat debate unfold. It's really been billed as gas boiler versus heat pump, and I don't necessarily see it that way. I see it as gas versus electrification. Electrification, there are lots of different options. I'm sat here, for example, in my garden office, and all I really need in here is one infrared heating panel, for example. That I can turn on when I need. In my house, a heat pump would be a better option, but there's lots of different options. You're familiar with the guys, I'm sure, at Tepio, which is another great British company that we've got high hopes. So I think it will be the joining hands of the Octopuses, the Hetios, the Tepios, My Energy, Sunamps, etc. will see us in a very, very different place. And I think from my perspective, I am very, very optimistic about what's going to happen in the UK in the next few years.
Yeah,
Don't ask me about America. Don't ask me about America. That's still got a bit of a journey ahead of it, I think, in the next few years. If I think what's going to happen in the autumn happens.
Yeah, that is definitely the one that you fear will actually take 10 steps back if Mr. Trump comes into power again. But no, I say it's certainly an exciting time to be involved in the UK clean tech space. I think we're starting to see a huge range of different types of demographic of customers coming to the table, certainly inquiring about these kind of solutions, and that's a key trigger, if you actually start to see rather than the early adopters, and you actually start to see the early majority coming through, starts to normalize the product range a little bit, starts to normalize the property types a little bit. You start to get to a point where you're seeing system designs that, from one house to another, not actually that different. Whereas maybe 5 or 7 years ago, everything felt like a very bespoke solution. We're starting to get to a point now where we're seeing kind of packages and approaches that will just cookie cutter a little bit into people's homes. It's not a hugely bespoke service and solution each time, which aids kind of ongoing logistics in terms of products that you're picking and ongoing support and maintenance to those installations. So it certainly feels to me that we're starting to take that change and normalizing a little bit on the journey, and hopefully that then leads to that ramp up, and I'm sure the same will happen with electric vehicles. So it's watch this space, I think, over the next few years.
Well, who could argue? If in another 10 years we're where I think we'll be, and I think where you think and hope we'll be, who could argue that you and Tom and me and Robert and everyone else who's stuck with it over the last 20 years and is going to do so presumably over the next 10, who could argue that we haven't been extremely patient and hard working to make sure this happens? Because you'll know the industry is full of people like us who've been doing this for
absolutely
at least a couple of decades, who continue to do it in despite of, let's be honest, some difficult times over those 2 decades. So I'm very, very optimistic, and I'd definitely do that podcast in 10 years with you if we're still alive, Simon, obviously.
Well, I've got no more hair to lose, so it can only go one way, really.
I haven't got a lot. Yeah, I haven't got a lot. So,
but Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Honestly, it's been to have you on, especially say when I think about the people who have been influential in this industry, and I've had the pleasure of having so many of them on the show over the last year, and you're certainly a name that jumps out in my mind from seeing yourself and Adam and the team and the effort that went into that Renewables Roadshow back in the day, and to see where you're at now, still working with Adam and producing not only the exhibitions but also the online work as well. It's a credit to you and your whole team, and you say if we go the way we're going to go, definitely a pat on the back for you and the team for the effort that you've put in. And just for anybody that is watching, if they did want to go online and see the YouTube channel, do you want to give that a quick plug in terms of the how do they get to that?
Yeah, I'll do the obligatory plug. So we do 2 episodes a week on the Fully Charged Show. So just search Fully Charged Show in YouTube. We do 2 episodes a week on the Everything Electric Show, which, as I say, is more home energy based. So again, that's on YouTube as well. And then big plug with Everything Electric London is coming up at the end of March at XL, and then Everything Electric North up at Harrogate in May as well. It'd be great to see as many people as possible. I should say energy and transport professionals go for free on the first day. I should as well. But no, it's been our privilege really, and thank God for Robert Llewellyn, who just had this idea to create a YouTube channel, which does the one thing that I think was missing. I saw it all the time. I went to loads of B2B stuff, many with these things with you, and I thought, we've got to get out there and convince the public now. Yeah. I think we're all convinced we've got to get out there and convince the public. And he, by launching a YouTube channel where he just was able to speak to people in a non-patronizing way about these technologies, has had a huge influence. So it's been our pleasure to work on it, and let's hope we can see the job through. And maybe 10 years' time, no matter how much hair we've got left, maybe then we can have a bit of a rest.
Hand over the baton to somebody else.
Oh yeah, that would be. I love it, and I've wanted to do it for a long time. But yeah, there's a definite recognition that I'm getting a bit older, and actually it would be nice to train the next bunch of people.
That's it. Hand over the login details to the YouTube channel and move on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for watching another episode of the Heat to Home Energy Show. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.